All right, my babies, we're back at 5.4, where assess requirement changes. All right, so I want you guys to remember that literally the name says it all, right? One of the hardest thing, it's funny because one of the jokes about programming is one of the hardest things in programming is naming variables, because ultimately a variable is where you store information, and you have to kind of like write the names properly. And with these, it's the same as the documentation; they have to be named because it's a lot of information about something that has to be stored. So assess requirement changes, I'm assuming that we are assessing the changes to the requirements, right? What's the purpose? The purpose is to evaluate the implications of proposed changes and requirements and designs. So we have to evaluate the implications to the changes proposed and required to the changes proposed to the requirements of the, what's the purpose? To evaluate the implications of the changes proposed to the requirements and designs. Description. The assess requirements changes task is performed as new needs or possible solutions are identified. Now remember, like we're always researching and trying to do things differently. And as we get basically closer to figuring out the solution, we're always figuring new stuff out. And by eliminating the stuff that we thought existed that shouldn't exist, or by adding the stuff that we didn't think existed but they should exist, that's how we basically get closer and closer and closer. Assessment must be performed to determine whether a proposed change will increase the value of the solution, and if so, what actions should be taken. Business analysts assess the potential effect of the change of the solution value and whether proposed changes introduce conflicts with other requirements or increase the level of risk. Business analysts also ensure. So here, basically, what we're doing is we're checking about the we're assessing the potential effect of the change to the solution value and whether the proposed change introduces conflicts with other requirements or increase the level of risk. Ah, see, when you read this stuff, actually like is crystal clear, but you have to put it in a way in your mind because ultimately what we're doing is whatever we're adding or whatever new change has to happen or whatever new requirements we're putting in, because everything is traceable, right? We have to see where it connects to and how it affects them. That's basically what they're saying. But you have to say it in your own way in order for it to completely be absorbed by you, or else you'll just be copying the information you're seeing. Business analysts also ensure each proposed change can be traced back to a need. When assessing changes, business analysts consider if each proposed change aligns with the overall strategy. So if they check if the actual change that's to be done aligns with the strategy, affects the value delivered to the business or stakeholder groups, like it's not just a change that's arbitrary because some manager didn't want to do his work, and impacts the time to deliver or the resources required to deliver the value, and alters any risks, opportunities, or constraints associated with the overall initiative. Okay? Still simple stuff, right? Because, like, a whole lot of things to consider financially, motivationally, morally, all kinds of things to consider. The results of the assessment must support the decision making and change control approaches defined by the task, plan, business analysis, governance. If the assessment deems something not necessary and it doesn't flow, we don't do it. That's basically it. What are the inputs? Inputs are proposed change can be identified by any time and impact any aspect of the business analysis work or deliverables completed to date. You never know when a stakeholder goes like, I'm thinking of this. There are many triggers for a proposed change, including business strategy changes, stakeholder legal requirements, or regulatory changes. Requirements may need to be assessed to identify the impact of a proposed modification. Actually, because once you're actually approaching a change, you have to look at the requirements that it affects or that affect it. And the designs may be assessed to identify the impact of proposed modifications. Anytime we're touching the requirements, we're touching the designs. Now, what's the diagram about? What do we need for the inputs? We need requirements, designs, and the change proposed. Huh, because the title of this is assessing requirement changes. And what are the tools? Change strategy, domain knowledge, governance approach, legal regulation information, requirements, architecture, solution scope. Practically similar to the maintaining part, right? No, to the prioritized requirements part. Because you have to go through all of these and see what the fuck, like if we're doing something out of what we planned, and if that has to be kind of like reviewed, because then you have to go through the documentation from A to Z. And the output is requirements change assessment and a designs change assessment. What are the elements? Assessment formality. Business analysts will determine the formality of the assessment process based on the information available, depending as well, like in the apparent importance of the change and the governance process. So like some shit is very heavy, like actually making a change to the like actually making a change to a product itself. That's a heavy one. Or maybe it's how the product is being actually like handled from point of production to delivery. Like some changes are fundamental and foundational that might require a lot more formality, while other changes are a lot more kind of like easy. Many proposed changes may be withdrawn from consideration or declined before any formal approval is required. Oh, the formality here they're talking about, yeah, exactly. So like formality here applies to how we approach the change from a decision-making basis or from an actual like implementation basis. A predictive approach may indicate a more formal assessment of proposed changes. Because if we're predicting things, then we basically could make a plan out of them. In predictive approaches, the impact of each change can be disruptive. The change can potentially generate a substantial reworking of tasks and activities completed. In previous activities, an adaptive approach may require less formality as the assessment of proposed changes. Here, they're talking about an adaptive approach. So I like the fact that this here connected all the other things that they were talking about here, because the impact of each change can be disruptive. The change can potentially generate, like, my mind was like, yeah, substantially, we're working with tasks and activities completed in previous cases. But when they mentioned adaptive approach, I was like, okay, so that changes how I see formality. Because now basically may require less formality simply because an adaptive approach is always like assessment of proposed changes in the as we move forward, we assess whether this change is kind of like substantial or not, or significant or not. So it doesn't really take us off what we're doing, but it kind of puts it on the like, what do they call it? Puts it within our scope of our eyesight. So we could always go back and look at that change if it's relevant where we're doing. We don't necessarily have to be like, fuck this shit, we don't want to do it, or we don't necessarily have to like leave everything in order to do it. An adaptive approach. While there may be revoking need as a result of the change, adaptive approaches try to minimize the impact of changes by utilizing iterative and incremental implementation techniques. So adaptive approach was misdiagnosed by me. What it means is you take the change and you kind of like do step by step instead of doing the whole change at one time, which is the formality part that they're talking about. You kind of split it into smaller pieces and you slowly like add it to the movements. Impact analysis. Impact analysis is performed to assess and evaluate the effect of a change. Traceability is a useful tool for performing impact analysis. See traceability, because everything's connected through the tracing factor that you actually went through, which means that when something clicks, you get to see what it connects to. And when a requirement changes, its relationship to other requirements or solution components can be reviewed. Each related requirement or component may also require a change to support the new requirement. Get it? Because we're looking at how everything is connected through the trace map that we did. So if one thing changes and affects the others, then we kind of have to go to the others and see how they're affected and see if that changes them and then how what they're connected to and. When considering changes or additions to existing requirements, business analysts assess the impact of the proposed change by considering the benefit, the cost, the impact, the schedule, the urgency. Should I go through them? Why the fuck not? Benefit, the benefit that will be gained by accepting the change. Wow. Explain. The cost, the total cost to implement the change, including the cost to make the change, the cost to associate rework, the opportunity costs, such as the number of other features that may need to be sacrificed or deferred if the change is approved. Impact, the number of customers or business processes affected if the change is accepted. Schedule, the impact to the existing delivery commitments if the change is approved. Urgency, the level of importance, including the factors which drive necessity, such as regulator or safety issues. Impact resolution, depending on the planned approach, various stakeholders, including the business analyst, may be authorized to approve, deny, or defer the proposed change. Cool, man. We actually get some power here. You see this? You see this? Yeah. Look at this, baby. I'm gonna give it red. Gonna give it red. Gonna give it red. Fuck this shit. We actually have authorization. Maybe authorized to approve. Done. Look at this, baby. Finally, we have some power, right? All impacts and resolutions resulting from the change analysis are to be documented and communicated to all stakeholders. How decisions and changes will be made and communicated across the initiative is determined by the task plan business analysis governance. This is the one we talked about earlier. No, in the preliminary videos, basically. I think it's in chapter 2, task plan business analysis governance. Or no, it's in chapter 3. It's in chapter 3, 3.3. I have the book, man, for whoever wants it. Love you guys. Guidelines and tools. Change strategy describes the purpose and direction for changes, establishes the context for the change, and identifies the critical components of the change. Change strategy is something that we did before, right? And ultimately, with every change that we want to add, we go back to the strategy and see if the strategy actually fits or not. So remember, with everything that's added, we're re-questioning everything we've decided on, how we decided on it, and why we made that decision. And the goal behind that is to make sure like every single step we move forward is one that's completely firm on the ground, not heavy, firm. Domain knowledge, knowledge of the expertise of business, like these are the tools, right? Like you need domain knowledge or somebody who actually knows this fucking shit. A governance approach provides the guidance regarding the change control and the decision-making process, as well as the roles of stakeholders within the process. The governance approach is also what we did in chapter 3, I think. In chapter 3, it's the same thing, planned analysis government. Legal regulatory information describes legislative rules or regulations, what must be followed. Of course, they impact the requirements, and they must be considered when we're making changes. Requirements, architecture requirements may be related to each other. That's where the tracing part comes in, because the business analyst examines and analyzes the requirements, relationships to determine which requirements will be impacted, all by requested requirements change. And the solution scope must be considered when assessing changes to fully understand the impact of a proposed change. You don't want to change something that doesn't really impact the overall solution. Yeah. And what are the techniques? Business cases used to business cases used to identify proposed change. Business rules analysis used to assess. I think there's a full chapter on techniques, by the way, yeah? Because this leads me to page 107. So can you guys see them? Business cases. Oh, chapter 10. So I think, oh, fuck, there's a full, basically, yeah, there's a full chapter. There's a full chapter on all the different kinds of like techniques that we can use. Over 30 techniques. Fuck yeah, man. That means we're gonna go through all the techniques later on in the future. Amazeballs. Decision analysis used to facilitate the change assessment process. Document analysis used to analyze an existing document that facilitate an understanding of the impact of the change. Estimation used to determine the size of the change. Financial analysis used to estimate the financial consequences of a proposed change. Interface analysis used to help business analysts identify interfaces that can be affected by the change. Interviews used to gain an understanding of the impact of the organization or its assets from a single or small group of stakeholders. Item tracking used to track any issues or conflicts discovered during impact. Risk analysis and management used to determine the level of risk associated with the change. And workshops used to gain an understanding of the impact or resolve changes the world changes in the group setting. And who are the stakeholders? There's the customer, because the customer actually will be impacted by the change. Domain subject matter, because he's the one who tells us if the change actually makes sense or not. End user is basically who's going to kind of like get the change. It's either going to get in his face or something. Operational support provides information on both their ability to support the operation or of the solution and their need to understand the nature of change in the solution in order to like be able to support it. And project manager reviews the requirements change assessments. Regulator changes are likely to be referenced by auditors to confirm compliance standards. The sponsor accountable for the solution scope and can provide insight to be utilized when assessing change. And a tester consulted for establishing impact of the proposed changes. Testers seem to be kind of like the people that save us a whole lot of trouble, right? Because they're the ones that kind of go like, let's see if it blows up. Oh, and outputs. What are the outputs of this? Requirements change assessment, the recommendation to approve, modify, or deny proposed change to requirements. Design change assessment, which is the recommendation to approve, modify, or deny a proposed change to one or more design requirements. So basically, we get an assessment of every single one of these documentations. The requirements and designs, remember, they're married at the waist. And here we go, 5.5, approving requirements. Look at this, finished another video. Love you guys.